Hello, my name is Serena. One evening, while making dinner in a quiet kitchen, my phone lit up with a single text: divorce papers on the table. Expect my lawyer. No conversation. No explanation. Just erasure, like I was never a wife, never a person. But that text wasn't the beginning of my heartbreak. It was the final stroke in a plan they'd been building for years, freezing my accounts, taking my property, rewriting my name out of my own life. They thought I'd disappear quietly, fade into the margins. But they miscalculated. Would you like to know what happens when the one you tried to erase refuses to vanish? The evening had been perfectly ordinary, which is why what happened still feels like a lightning strike across my chest. I had just come home from work, dropped my bag by the door, and slipped off my heels. The small kitchen in our Charleston home smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, something I had put in the oven earlier, thinking it would be a nice way to welcome Lucian back. I hummed softly while setting the table, laying down 2 plates as I had done countless nights before. That's when my phone buzzed. I didn't think much of it. Lucian often texted me if he was running late or had to stop by his mother's. But when I reached for the phone and saw his name, I wasn't prepared for the words that stared back at me, sharp and merciless. Divorce papers on the table. Expect my lawyer. At first, my brain refused to process it. I blinked, shook my head slightly, then read it again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something more human. A small part of me thought maybe he'd send it to the wrong person, or maybe it was a cruel joke. But the longer I stared, the colder the words felt, slicing through the air around me. I didn't cry. Not right then. Instead, I froze. My hands stayed clenched around the phone, my breath stuck somewhere in my chest. The kitchen felt too quiet, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. I lowered myself into the chair at the table, my eyes falling on the second plate I had set. The chair across from me was empty, waiting for him. I stared at it, trying to imagine his face when he decided to type out those words. He hadn't even called. He hadn't looked me in the eye. He had ended 15 years of marriage in a single text. After several long minutes, I forced myself to type a reply. I didn't want to beg, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. So I wrote only 3 words. As you said. I hit send and placed the phone on the table, next to the untouched plate. My heart thudded slowly, painfully, but I sat up straighter, as if my posture alone could shield me from the humiliation. For years, I had given up pieces of myself for this marriage. I had left behind my teaching career, the small but steady life I had built, because Lucian wanted me closer to his family. Charleston had been his idea. He said his parents needed him, that his family's company required both of us to support it. So I adapted. I made his world my own, cooking for holidays, sitting quietly in meetings where my opinion was never asked for, taking care of the household so he could climb his ladder. And now, this was what I got, a business-like dismissal, as if I were just an employee whose contract had expired. The phone buzzed again. My stomach twisted before I even looked. My lawyer will call you. The word stabbed deeper. It was official now, no longer even personal. Lucian wasn't speaking to me as his wife, he was treating me like an inconvenience, a line item he wanted crossed off. It reminded me of every time he had avoided confrontation, sending his mother, his sister, or even one of his business partners to deliver news I should have heard from him. He had always preferred to hide behind others. Tonight was no different, except this time, it was his lawyer. I let the phone drop onto the table. My eyes blurred, but still no tears fell. Instead, I felt hollow. I got up and tried to busy myself, moving to the sink, rinsing a glass, anything to escape the suffocating silence. But when I turned back, the plates on the table sat there untouched, the chicken cooling, the candles I had lit flickering against the walls like some cruel joke. The dinner I had made felt like a symbol of everything I had offered: warmth, care, sacrifice, and how easily it could be ignored. I thought of calling my mother, but stopped myself. Leora rarely picked up when it was inconvenient for her, and I knew she would only tell me to stay calm, to be patient, as if patience hadn't already stolen years of my life. Calling my sister alone was out of the question. She had always sided with Lucian's mother, no matter the situation. I had learned long ago not to expect her loyalty. So I sat alone, my hands wrapped around the edge of the table. The smell of dinner no longer comforted me. It made me sick. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear me, "If he wants to turn this into a contract, then I will too." It wasn't anger yet. More like a seed planted deep inside the emptiness. A quiet resolve began to take root, so subtle I almost missed it. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would vanish without a fight. I leaned back in my chair, phone screen still glowing with his cold message. The light cast strange shadows across the kitchen walls. My reflection in the darkened window looked older, worn, but my eyes, they still held something. Not fire exactly, but not ashes either. "You think I'm erased already," I whispered to the empty room. "But you're wrong." The words didn't echo, but they filled the space inside me, carving out a promise I hadn't made before. The sky outside my kitchen window had turned pale gray by the time I finally left the table. The text still glowed faintly on my phone screen, even after the battery warning blinked red. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the sheets, staring at the ceiling, feeling my mind circle the same thought. He didn't even bother to look me in the eye. When the first thin light of dawn spilled through the blinds, I rose, my body heavy but my mind strangely alert. The house felt colder than it had the night before. I made coffee out of habit, though my hands trembled as I poured it. The smell should have been comforting, but instead it seemed hollow. I checked my phone, half hoping there would be an apology, some explanation, anything human. Nothing. Just the silence of a man who had already decided I no longer existed in his life. I showered quickly, dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, and slipped on my sneakers. It was still early enough that the streets were quiet. I needed to do something, to move, or else I would sink into the paralysis that had nearly swallowed me last night. My thoughts kept circling back to the joint account, our emergency fund, the one I had built slowly from my own teaching salary before I quit. I didn't trust Lucian's message. I had to see for myself. Charleston's historic district was just waking up when I parked near the bank. The brick sidewalks glistened slightly from last night's rain, and the air carried that damp, salty scent from the harbor. I wrapped my coat tighter around me as I walked up the steps. Inside, the bank was bright and sterile. A few customers stood in line, their murmured conversations blending with the soft hum of printers and the occasional beep from the teller machines. I took a number and waited, clutching my bag a little too tightly. My turn came quickly. The young teller smiled politely. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice even. "I'd like to withdraw some funds from my joint account with Lucian Hartwell." She typed our names into the computer, her fingers moving swiftly. But then her brow furrowed. "One moment, please." She clicked a few more times, then looked up at me, her expression shifting into something carefully neutral. "I'm sorry, but this account has been frozen. Pending legal review." The word struck me like a blow. "Frozen? What do you mean?" My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. She glanced around, lowering her tone. "It looks like there's a pending legal action. You'll need to speak with your attorney." I stared at her, feeling the blood drain from my face. "This is my money too. I built this account. How can it just be frozen?" "I'm sorry," she repeated gently, but her eyes slid away from mine. She'd said those words before, to other people, in other quiet disasters. "You'll have to consult your lawyer." Behind me, someone shifted impatiently in line. A man coughed softly. I could feel eyes on my back, even if no one was staring openly. In that moment, I wasn't a wife or a woman with 15 years of shared history. I was just a problem being processed. My hands went cold. I reached for my wallet, gripping it tightly as though it might anchor me. But it felt lighter than ever, almost weightless. The teller's polite tone sliced deeper than open hostility would have. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thin. I turned and walked out, holding myself upright even as my stomach twisted. Outside, the air was brighter but no warmer. I crossed the street slowly, heading back to my car. My reflection in the bank's glass door had looked like a stranger, hair pulled back, shoulders squared, but eyes hollow. Driving back was a blur. My fingers clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I didn't play the radio. I didn't even think about calling Lucian. I already knew there would be no answer, no explanation, just silence. The house greeted me with its familiar quiet, but it no longer felt like home. The kitchen still smelled faintly of last night's chicken, now cold in the fridge. I left my bag on the counter and stood for a moment, staring at the mail piled near the fruit bowl. As I sat at the table, memories began to flicker uninvited. I remembered my first year's teaching, those long days when I deposited every extra dollar into that joint account. I remembered Lucian telling me, "It's our safety net. You're doing the right thing." His own income had mostly gone into family projects, as he called them, renovating his mother Isolde's property, investing in his sister's boutique. My contributions had been invisible, swallowed into a household that never called it mine. Now, staring at the empty ledger on my banking app, I felt those years collapse into nothing. It was as if someone had taken an eraser to my life, rubbing away not just my marriage but my financial existence. I pressed my palms flat on the table, steadying myself. There was no one to call. Not my mother, who would only urge me to stay composed. Not Aloan, who had always smiled too brightly when Lucian's mother spoke over me. The isolation was no longer just emotional, it was practical. Hours passed without me noticing. I moved through the house slowly, as if underwater, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping down counters already clean. My phone stayed silent. By late afternoon, a low sun cast long shadows through the windows. I sat on the couch, scrolling through old emails, mortgage statements, insurance documents, and then one labeled, "Property Transfer, Urgent." The subject line made my chest tighten. I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed the phone down next to the envelope on the kitchen counter. Its red-stamped "Urgent" glared at me like a wound. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, suspicion began to bloom. If Lucian had already frozen the account, what else had he done? I stood there, staring at the envelope, the house silent around me. My breath came slow, deliberate. The envelope on the kitchen counter didn't scream, didn't cry, but it may as well have. It sat there, stark and unassuming, bearing the words, "Property Transfer, Urgent." A balm in bureaucratic wrapping. I stared at it for minutes, as if it might dissolve under my gaze. My palm pressed flat against the cold granite, anchoring me to the only thing that hadn't shifted under my feet, yet. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked away, slow and deliberate. Down the hallway, past the frames that still held photos of a life that no longer existed. The smile on Lucian's face in those photos mocked me now. I grabbed my keys and stood at the door. I hesitated, let the weight of the evening press down on my lungs, and inhaled deeply before stepping into the dusk. Charleston was beautiful at twilight, deceptively so. The cobbled streets, the scent of jasmine, the glint of lantern light on antique iron gates. It made betrayal feel oddly civilized. Lucian's family home sat like a monument to old money and selective morality. White pillars, grand windows, a lawn so manicured it looked unreal. The kind of house that whispered, "We're better than you," even as it welcomed you in. Inside, golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers. Laughter floated out the windows, curated and hollow. This dinner had been framed as casual, a family gathering. But I knew better. Every instinct in me warned this was not dinner. This was theater. And I was the unwelcome act. I stepped inside, heels clicking against the marble floor of the foyer. Isolde stood to the left of the doorway, arms crossed tightly like a gatekeeper. Her designer blouse matched her controlled expression. Aloan was close by, swirling a glass of Cabernet with exaggerated grace, her lips curled into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lucian appeared from the dining room, giving me the faintest nod, formal, detached. Like I was an acquaintance who had shown up uninvited. I forced a smile and moved further in. We sat around the massive dining table that had hosted countless family holidays and tense brunches. The silverware gleamed. Candles flickered. A roast rested on a bed of vegetables, but the real meal tonight was reputation, and I was the main course. The seat beside mine was conspicuously empty. Lucian had once taken that seat, brushing his hand over mine, smiling across the table like I was his whole world. Now, he sat further down, between his mother and his sister, as if geography could absolve him. Isolde broke the silence first. "Serena, we're glad you could come," she said, voice smooth and sharp, like cut glass. "I trust the transition has been tolerable." I nodded, lips pressed into civility. As tolerable as expected. We danced around meaningless topics, weather, traffic, some upcoming charity gala. Eloan chimed in with practiced charm, offering nothing real. Lucian barely spoke, except for a murmured agreement here and there. No one mentioned the envelope. No one acknowledged what we all knew. Until Isolde, wine untouched, lifted her voice just as the main course was served. "You know," she began, her fork idle, her tone suddenly projecting, "when I planned tonight, I envisioned a celebration of family, of legacy, of honor. But not everyone understands what that means." Her gaze landed on me. Held me. "Some," she said, voice chilling, "only bring disgrace." It wasn't a slap. It was worse. It was calculated, designed to humiliate me in front of the only people who once considered me part of them. A fork clattered. Someone exhaled. Lucian didn't speak. Eloan sipped her wine, the corners of her mouth twitching with something close to glee. I could have broken then. But I didn't. Instead, I looked Isolde directly in the eye and said quietly, "I'm sorry you feel that way. But I've never asked to be invisible." The room stilled. The weight of my voice surprised even me. After dinner, I excused myself. My hands were trembling as I climbed the stairs, each one felt heavier than the last. I reached the upstairs bathroom, locked the door, and finally opened the envelope. Inside, the official deed. I unfolded the paper slowly, line by line. Lucian's name. Vera's name, his cousin, who had always hovered too close. No mention of me. None. Not even a footnote. Despite contributing over half of the down payment. Despite signing the initial forms together. Despite promises whispered in the middle of the night. This wasn't just oversight. This was erasure. This was theft, dressed in paperwork. My reflection stared back at me from the gilded mirror. Red-rimmed eyes. Foundation cracking along my jawline. Lipstick smudged. I dabbed at my face, not to fix it, but to feel real again. A memory surfaced, our first meeting with the notary. Lucian had squeezed my hand, said, "Of course it'll be joint. What's mine is yours." That had been a lie. I steadied myself. I would not cry here. Not in their house. Not tonight. As I descended the stairs, I passed Vera and Eloan whispering in the hall. They stopped, looked at me like a flaw in their perfect design. That glance said it all, this had been planned. I left without saying goodbye. In the driveway, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, engine off, the deed in my lap like a tombstone. I whispered to the quiet air, "They think I'm powerless." Then I looked up. They don't know me yet. I sat in my car longer than I should have, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, my breath fogging up the glass. The envelope, still unopened, was tucked into the inside pocket of my coat, pressing against my ribs like a warning. I could have driven home. I could have driven away. But something deeper than spite held me there. I had to know. I had to see for myself how far they were willing to go to erase me. So instead of turning the car toward home, I drove across town, to the Charleston Community Center. The charity brunch was tomorrow morning, but I knew they'd be setting up tonight. And if Vera was the new golden girl, they wouldn't waste a single opportunity to broadcast it. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Golden sunlight filtered through magnolia branches as I parked outside the community center, gripping the steering wheel a second too long. I was dressed simply, charcoal dress, navy blazer, minimal makeup, clean lines. Not because I didn't care, but because I refused to give them ammunition. The parking lot buzzed with conversation and laughter. As I approached the entrance, a large display board stood proudly near the door. It was the official program for the brunch, featuring donor names, sponsors, organizers. And right there, in bold font and high-resolution print, was Vera Hartwell's smiling face. Underneath it, lead organizer. Community builder. Daughter of legacy. My eyes scanned the rest of the board once, then again. No mention of me. Not even in the acknowledgements. I stood still for a beat, fighting the heat that crept into my chest. Then I inhaled deeply and walked in. Inside, the hall was a portrait of Southern civility, floral centerpieces, linen tablecloths, silver trays of pastries and glasses of orange juice. People milled about in pastel outfits, soft voices murmuring over mimosas. I recognized many of them, neighbors, board members, women I'd planned events with. I smiled, nodded, but felt the cold shift in their gazes. Polite. Measured. Distant. At the reception desk, a volunteer handed me a printed program. My name was there, but buried, misspelled slightly, tucked beneath, former liaison, previous cycle. I tucked it under my arm like a souvenir of betrayal and entered the main room. Overhead, a projector played a looping slideshow. There was Vera, again and again, cutting ribbons, shaking hands, standing next to Lucian. Applause broke out from the far corner. Vera had just walked in. She really stepped up, I overheard someone say near me. Lucian's whole family is behind this now, another whispered. And I knew, this wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate rewriting. As I sipped my coffee and made my way toward the back of the room, I passed a cluster of women near the pastries. Did you hear she spent nearly $400,000 renovating that old place? One asked in a hushed tone. I heard she didn't even get permits, the other replied. Always impulsive. They didn't need to say my name. They looked at me as they said it. I kept walking. Near the entryway, a small table displayed recent publications, newsletters, community magazines. One caught my eye, a glossy article titled, "A Fresh Face for Charleston, Vera Hartwell's Vision for the Future." I flipped through it. Her photo, her words, her narrative. Events I had initiated were now framed as her triumphs. Projects I had funded through nights of work, late calls, and sacrifice now had her name on the dedication plaques. Not a single reference to me. No trace of my hand in any of it. History, edited. Clean, sharp, effective. During the break, I stepped outside for air. The autumn chill hit me like a slap. I pulled out my phone and dialed Aloan. She answered after 3 rings, chipper. Serena. How are you? I didn't respond to her forced warmth. Why did you take my name off the program? A beat of silence. Then her tone shifted. Serena, you know we didn't want any drama. This was the best decision for everyone. No, I said, my voice low. It was convenient for you. It made it easier to sell a cleaner story. She sighed, exasperated. You're being emotional. Honestly, you should be grateful we're not dragging your name through more mud. Grateful, I repeated slowly, letting the word settle. Yes. We gave you a way out. Quietly. Respectfully. You should take it. I didn't disappear when Lucian cheated. I didn't disappear when you all lied. And I'm not going to disappear now. She didn't reply. Just a cold click as the call ended. That evening, I went home and pulled out a stack of photo albums from the hallway closet. Dust clung to the spines, years of memories tucked inside. I flipped through pages of family trips, holidays, anniversaries. My younger self smiled from the photos, arms around Lucian, laughter in my eyes. But as I turned each page, I noticed it. The pattern. Photos missing. Faces cropped. In one album, a Christmas picture where I had been in the middle was trimmed down so that only Vera and Lucian were left, arms locked. My arm, just a sliver, was still visible, like a ghost. At the Marlowe house, they replaced our wedding portrait with one from the same day, but digitally altered. I was gone. I stared at the empty spaces and felt it like a blow. They weren't just cutting me off. They were unmaking me. I opened my journal and scribbled in a shaking hand, "If I stay silent, I will vanish, not just from their world, but from my own." The house was dark, quiet. Just me and the sound of the fridge humming. I spread the materials out on the kitchen table, the brunch program, the article, the pictures, the silent erasures. My fingers traced the headlines, the captions, the lies. And then I understood. Silence had stopped being a shield. It had become a grave. And they were burying me in it, one polite omission at a time. I whispered aloud to the empty room, "You want me gone? Then watch what happens when I stop staying small." It wasn't anger. It was clarity. The fight was no longer about him. Or Vera. Or Eloan. It was about me. And I wasn't going to vanish quietly. The morning light slid through the blinds, pale and cool, casting thin golden stripes across the wooden floor. I hadn't really slept, more like hovered in that strange space between rest and unrest, where your mind replays every conversation, every insult, every silence like a broken record. My journal still lay open on the nightstand, the last sentence scrawled in rushed, shaky handwriting. "They won't erase me." I stared at those words for a long time before swinging my legs off the bed and pressing my feet onto the hardwood. The chill bit into my skin, but I welcomed it. It made everything feel real, clearer, sharper. I wrapped a robe around myself and walked barefoot into the kitchen, where the quiet felt both peaceful and haunting. Nothing moved. No texts, no apologies, no knock at the door from someone suddenly realizing they'd gone too far. I poured water into the kettle and waited as it hissed to life. The tiny room off the kitchen, the one I used to call my reading nook, was now a battlefield of paperwork. A folded quilt still rested on the armchair, but now it looked out of place among the chaos. I sat down at the small desk, where my laptop glowed softly. My fingers hesitated over the keys. Then, I typed, Phase 1, Proof. I opened the shared bank account records. Each transaction stared back at me like a betrayal. I went line by line, highlighting every deposit made from my own salary, the tutoring sessions, the summer workshops, the night classes I taught while everyone else was asleep. Each one labeled family account, but now I saw the irony. It wasn't about family. It was about control. My chest ached as I realized how thoroughly I had been cut out, not with a single act, but through years of subtle erosion. I wasn't just disappearing. I had been systematically erased. I created a folder on my desktop and named it, in bold letters, Proof. Inside it, I dragged every document I could find, mortgage statements I'd signed, photos from years ago when things still felt real, PDFs of emails with Lucian's lawyer, even text screenshots that at first had felt petty to keep. Now they were lifelines. Each file was like a thread I was weaving into a net to catch myself with, if I fell. By mid-morning, I felt dizzy from staring at the screen for so long. But I wasn't done. I showered, pulled on a neutral-toned blazer, tied my hair into a neat bun, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't look powerful. I looked tired. But there was something new in my expression, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. I drove across town to the historic district, where cobblestone streets made everything feel like it belonged in a different century. The law office was tucked inside an old brick building with ivy curling around the windows. A brass plaque read, Jameson and Cole, Family Law. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish. A receptionist offered me water and then led me down a hallway to a small office where an older man in a blue suit, Mr. Carver, waited behind a desk cluttered with files. He had kind eyes but a practiced stillness, the kind lawyers probably mastered after years of hearing every kind of betrayal imaginable. I told him everything, the frozen account, the forged signature, the sudden transfer of our shared property. He didn't interrupt. He took notes, asked for clarification, nodded. When I finished, he folded his hands. You've already done more homework than most people do before coming to me. That folder will be helpful. But from this point on, I need you to do two things. 1. Document everything. Every word, every text, every change to your finances or daily life. And 2, don't react emotionally in public. I blinked. You mean stay silent? I mean be strategic, he said calmly. Silence isn't weakness when it's used to build a case. The moment you shout, they paint you as unstable. The moment you fight back too soon, they twist your story. It made sense. But it also felt like swallowing glass. I nodded anyway. He handed me a slim packet on asset division and spousal misconduct laws. You're not powerless, he added. But you'll need to be patient. Think long game. I left with the packet clutched to my chest, my emotions swirling in tight, churning circles. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car with the windows rolled up and stared at the beige cover of the packet like it held a grenade. Strategic silence. The phrase made me want to scream. But deep down, I knew he was right. That evening, the house was quiet when I came back. Lucian was in the living room, lounging on the couch with a glass of scotch, the television murmuring in the background. He looked like someone who had just gotten away with something and assumed no one had noticed. I stood in the doorway. The folder of evidence felt like it weighed 10 pounds in my hands. Why did you sign my name without my consent? I asked. My voice didn't waver. It shocked even me. He looked up slowly, like I was a minor inconvenience. It made things cleaner, he said, as if explaining why he switched insurance companies. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. My grip on the folder tightened. Cleaner. I echoed. You took everything we built and handed it over like it was yours alone. He shrugged and sipped his drink. You'll be fine. Just don't start making noise. It's not a good look. I stared at him, a storm building quietly behind my ribs. You think this is about the house or the bank account? But it's not. It's about respect. He smirked. Respect is earned, Serena. There it was. The dismissal. Not with raised voices, not with insults, but with indifference. And that, somehow, hurt worse. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply stepped back and said, barely above a whisper, then you've just lost the last bit of mercy I had left for you. He turned back to the TV. Suit yourself. I walked down the hallway, folder pressed to my chest like armor. With every step, my limbs felt heavier, but I didn't stop. Inside the folder, the pages bent under the pressure of my fingers, but I didn't loosen my grip. I couldn't. At the doorway, I paused and looked back one last time. He didn't even glance at me. That would be his mistake. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't backing down. I've just started, I whispered. And this time, I meant it. The next day began like any other, but the air felt heavier. My vow from the night before still hummed beneath my skin like a live wire. I rose early, brewed coffee, and flipped through the folder of evidence on the kitchen table. Each page felt like armor. Yet I knew armor meant little if you never stepped into the battlefield. A cream-colored envelope waited beside my mug, a formal invitation to the Marlowe Foundation's Autumn Gala, held at a restored theater downtown. The elegant script spelled out Lucian and Vera's names as co-hosts. My own name appeared only once, tucked at the bottom under special thanks, like an afterthought. I stared at it, my jaw tightening. This was my project. My work had built its reputation. But my name had been pushed into a corner. I almost threw the invitation away. But something steadied me. I needed to be seen, even if they tried to erase me. Publicly showing up wasn't weakness. It was a statement. That evening, Charleston's historic district glimmered with strings of lights and polished brass. The theater's facade looked like something out of a movie, arched windows, velvet drapes visible through the glass. Guests spilled out of black cars, dresses and tuxedos catching the glow. I had chosen a simple black dress, understated but precise, with pearl earrings and a small clutch. My heart pounded as I stepped from the car and approached the entrance. Inside, chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors. Waiters moved with silver trays. Laughter rose in pockets of conversation. My stomach twisted when I spotted Vera across the room in a shimmering gown, Lucian at her side like an accessory to her new public image. Eloan hovered nearby, already watching me with that knowing half-smile. I moved toward a table near the back, trying to blend but also stand tall. I hadn't even removed my coat before a man in a tailored suit stepped in front of me, holding an empty champagne glass. "Miss, can you take this?" he asked briskly, eyes already sliding past me. For a heartbeat I didn't understand. Then it hit me. He thought I was staff. I straightened, the coat still in my hand. "I'm not working tonight," I said softly, handing the glass back. His eyes flicked over me, confused, embarrassed, but he didn't apologize, only mumbled something and walked away. Across the room, Eloan caught the exchange. She did not correct him. She simply smirked and turned to whisper in Vera's ear. Heat rose up my neck. I forced my face calm, my hands steady. It was one thing to be erased in print. It was another to be erased in person. A string quartet played as guests took their seats. I sat at the edge of a table, silent, while Lucian and Vera drifted from group to group, shaking hands, laughing. My mind replayed the scene with the glass over and over. Each replay sharpened the humiliation. Then a local news crew arrived. Bright lights flared as cameras were set up near the stage. The reporter, a woman I'd met before, smiled widely at Lucian and Vera as she guided them to a small backdrop featuring the Marlowe Foundation logo. "We're so thrilled to have you both," the reporter gushed. "You've done such incredible work for Charleston, these community projects, the scholarships, the food drives. Vera, your leadership is inspiring." I stood off to the side, out of frame. Each word landed like a blow. My leadership. My vision. Years of planning. My name absent from the entire segment. Not once did the reporter glance my way, though our eyes met briefly before the cameras rolled. She looked past me, like I was part of the wallpaper. Lucian nodded, looking serious and humble. Vera smiled with that perfect poise. "We believe in giving back," she said, tilting her head just so for the camera. "It's a family tradition." I felt my chest constrict. Not a single mention of me. I slipped away before the applause began. The theater's restroom was quiet, its tile cool under my heels. I leaned on the sink, gripping the edge until my knuckles whitened. In the mirror, my reflection blurred, the harsh lighting made me look like a ghost. "I used to be the face of this work," I murmured. "Now I'm the ghost in the room." The words felt raw. I closed my eyes, breathing through the sting. Tears threatened but didn't fall. Not here. Not now. I opened my clutch, pulled out my phone, and started saving articles, screenshots, clips, evidence of how they were rewriting the story. My thumb moved quickly, deliberate. This was no longer self-pity. It was documentation. When I emerged, the gala had shifted into full swing, music louder, voices more animated, camera crews moving on to interview donors. I moved quietly along the perimeter, capturing small videos on my phone. No one noticed me. They'd already decided I wasn't there. But I was. As the event wound down, I slipped out a side door into the cool night air. The street was empty, the theater's glow spilling across the cobblestones. I paused at the edge of the sidewalk, phone in one hand, clutch in the other. "They turned me into a ghost," I whispered to the night. "Now I'll haunt them with the truth." My breath formed a thin cloud in the chill air. I took one last look at the theater, at the people inside who thought they had finished erasing me. Then I walked away, each step measured, my phone heavy with proof. The car idled beneath a street lamp outside the Marlowe estate, casting long shadows across the windshield. I sat still in the driver's seat, the envelope heavy in my coat pocket, my fingers tracing its edge like a blade I was about to unsheath. The air was thick with early evening hush, broken only by distant laughter and the soft trill of cicadas. The house glowed warmly ahead, oblivious to the storm I carried with me. I had rehearsed every step, every line, every calculated silence. But the moment my hand gripped the door handle, the certainty wavered. I wasn't here for a scene. I was here for precision. The Marlowe home loomed grand and curated, as always. Every shrub trimmed, every light warm and flattering. I took the side path through the garden, avoiding the front entrance and the prying eyes it attracted. Slipping through the side door, I found myself in the hallway lined with polished wood and the scent of eucalyptus candles, manufactured tranquility masking the rot underneath. Guests filled the foyer and adjacent rooms. Laughter floated like perfume, mingling with the notes of a string quartet tucked in a corner. Clusters of people exchanged pleasantries over flutes of champagne. These were the curated elites, faces I'd once known, once led. Now they looked past me as though I were no more than a footnote in someone else's legacy. But I didn't come to be seen. I made my way toward the living room. Along the hallway, old photos hung in symmetrical precision, family vacations, fundraising galas, civic awards. And then I saw it. My footsteps faltered. There, framed in gold and centered on the wall like a crown jewel, was the photo from the inaugural Community Revitalization Gala. A night that had once defined my career. The photo showed a smiling group, flanked by lush floral arrangements, and at its heart, me, arm in arm with Vera Hartwell, the woman now heralded as the face of the program. But the plaque beneath it read, Vera Hartwell, Community Champion. No mention of me. Not even as co-founder. The earlier plaque had named us both. I remembered choosing the font myself. My lungs constricted. This wasn't just theft, it was revision. Deliberate, quiet revision. A lifetime of contribution was being redacted one artifact at a time. I stepped closer, staring at my own erased legacy. My eyes stung. Behind me, a burst of laughter erupted from the dining room, clueless of the silent war playing out in the hallway. I turned, feet unsteady, and slipped away unnoticed. I had no appetite for confrontations laced with faux civility. They would only spin the narrative, call me emotional, bitter, unstable. I wouldn't give them that script. Not tonight. Outside, I slumped into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. It wasn't grief, it was fury. Cold, analytical fury. The kind that came not from heartbreak, but from the understanding of patterns, of systems at play, and of my place being surgically cut out from history. I pulled out my phone. A notification blinked. A message from Nolan. You'll need this. Stop being silent. Attached were files, old email threads, accounting ledgers, grant approvals I had drafted, meeting minutes, everything I feared they had buried. And then, the photo. There I was, kneeling beside a group of children at the community garden we had launched in the East District. Dirt on my hands. Joy on my face. The sign in the background read, led by Serena Hartwell. I gasped. It was real. The truth I had started doubting existed outside my memories. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. Stop being silent. 3 words that landed like a challenge and a lifeline all at once. I glanced at the envelope still resting on the passenger seat, the one I had planned to hand to someone tonight, maybe Vera, maybe the board chair, maybe even just drop discreetly into a coat pocket. But now I knew. They wouldn't read it. They'd spin it. They'd deny it came from me. They'd bury it under meetings and PR statements. They were prepared for gossip and confrontation. They weren't prepared for documentation. I turned the ignition and began the drive home, each red light a chance to breathe deeper. My mind raced faster than the car, assembling a different plan. Not reactive. Strategic. I'd spent too long treating this as personal betrayal when in reality, it was a calculated power shift. They had used charm and positioning. I would use facts and narrative. When I entered the quiet of my house, I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I went to the reading nook, my sanctuary, and pulled out my old leather-bound journal. It smelled of dust and ink and memory. My hand hovered over the first blank page. And then I wrote. If they want war, I'll fight with truth. The ink steadied with each letter. The tremble in my hand faded. I wrote like I was reconstructing myself. Names. Dates. Projects. Funding streams. Boardroom deals. Back-channel comments. Every fragment I remembered, I documented. I didn't need a podium or a press conference. Not yet. But the intellectual counterattack had begun. Tomorrow, I'd contact the lawyer Nolan recommended. The one known for whistleblower protections. Then I'd reach out to Grace Lynn, the journalist who once said, the most dangerous stories are the ones no one dares to write. I wasn't invisible. I was inconvenient. And inconvenient women don't disappear. They publish. And when I do, they won't just see me. They'll remember why they feared me in the first place. The next morning, the sun rose like it knew something was about to break. The light slicing through my curtains felt sharper than usual, like a blade, not a comfort. There was a charge in the air, a static tension humming just beneath the surface, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I dressed with care, not for vanity, but for clarity. I chose a navy blue sheath dress, elegant but modest. Silver earrings, delicate and purposeful. My hair, softly pinned, framed my face without calling for attention. No dramatic makeup, no flashy accessories. I didn't need armor, I needed truth. And presence. That was enough. The church hall was already alive when I arrived, though no guests had yet stepped in. The Marlowe Foundation's annual gala was always a spectacle, but this year, it was also a chessboard. And I had studied the game far too long to misstep now. Stagehands moved with quiet efficiency, setting up lighting rigs and running sound tests. Volunteers carried floral arrangements, centerpieces, printed programs. Outside, media vans were pulling up, camera operators preparing their equipment for what they thought would be another elegant puff piece about Lucian and Vera's community leadership. They were in for something else. Inside the grand foyer, Vera and Lucian were already greeting early arrivals, gliding between donors and dignitaries like a couple out of a lifestyle magazine. Vera's smile didn't falter once, and Lucian's handshake was firm, charismatic. It made me sick. But what twisted something deeper in my gut was the sign posted at the entrance, the Marlowe Foundation Annual Gala, hosted by Lucian and Vera Marlowe. Below, in smaller, almost invisible font, special thanks to Serena Hartwell for previous contributions. Previous. As if I no longer existed. As if my years of work were a footnote. I moved slowly inside. People glanced at me like I was someone they almost recognized but couldn't place. There was polite curiosity, mild discomfort. I heard one woman murmur, "Is that Serena?" and another replied, "She's been out of the picture for a while, hasn't she?" My presence stirred something unspoken. I was the shadow they'd been trained not to see. The main hall soon filled, chandeliers casting golden light across a sea of silk and suits. At the far end of the stage sat a podium and, beside it, a large open Bible framed in white lilies. I blinked. That Bible, it had belonged to Eulalia, Lucian's grandmother. For decades, it had held the handwritten readings and reflections for each gala. It had been silent for years. Until now. The lights dimmed. A hush settled over the crowd. The program began with the usual pleasantries, music, a brief prayer, Lucian's polished welcome speech. But then, something unscripted. A young girl, no older than 8, wandered near the podium. Her curiosity innocent. She reached toward the open Bible and flipped through the pages. Something fluttered out, a small photograph. It landed face up on the stage floor. The child picked it up and looked around, confused. One of the ushers stepped forward, took it gently from her, and read aloud what was written on the back, unaware of the detonation he was about to set off. Serena was the true heart of this family. Never forget her sacrifices. Eulalia Marlowe. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Vera's hand, mid-wave, dropped to her side. Lucian's face turned bone white. And then the screen behind the stage flickered. The slideshow they had prepared, photos of Vera handing out checks, Lucian posing with donors, glitched. Then shifted. New images appeared. Me. Planting trees with children. Coordinating food drives. Speaking at fundraisers. Standing beside community leaders. Photos that hadn't seen daylight in years, some I didn't even know existed. Images they had buried, now unearthed. My name appeared in captions, bold and unmistakable. I could feel the room's heartbeat. Confusion. Murmurs. People craning their necks. Something real was unfolding. Then, Pastor Henry stepped forward from the side aisle. He was never meant to speak tonight. He hadn't been listed on the program. But there he stood, adjusting his collar, his voice calm but undeniable. I failed Serena, he said plainly. I failed her by not questioning the narrative I was handed. Tonight, I can't be silent. Truth matters more than image. And the truth is, this woman built the foundation this gala celebrates. A stunned silence fell again. The tension that had been simmering now boiled. Before Vera could react, another figure approached the stage. My attorney, Levin. Calm, composed, carrying a folder of documents. She stepped to the lectern. Tonight, I bring facts, she said, voice ringing clearly. Here are the original legal deeds, signed bank ledgers, incorporation documents. All in the name of Serena Hartwell. Assets. Property. Intellectual property. Not only was she the founder of this initiative, she remains its rightful steward. She placed the stack on the podium like a judge dropping a gavel. A camera clicked. Then another. Vera staggered to her feet, lips parted in disbelief. Lucian clenched his fists. They had no words. No shield left. I rose from my seat. I didn't rush the moment. I didn't gloat. I walked slowly, past rows of shocked faces, through a silence thick with awakening. I stopped in front of Vera, who looked at me like the past had returned to haunt her. This isn't over, she whispered. I met her gaze without flinching. For you, I said, it is. Behind us, people whispered. Nods passed between community elders. For the first time in years, I saw recognition. Not pity. Not confusion. Recognition. Justice had a sound tonight. It sounded like truth being spoken without fear. As I turned to walk back through the crowd, the hush shifted into something else, a quiet awe. I was no longer the footnote. No longer the erased. I was seen. I was undeniable. The night after the gala lingered like smoke. Not loud, not chaotic, just an aftertaste of applause that refused to dissolve. I lay awake in the half-dark, my fingers curled around the edge of a blanket I no longer wanted to call mine. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the silence after the curtain drops and the actors exit the stage. That kind of quiet that tells you, this scene is over. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just moved. Before the sun breached the horizon, I packed a small overnight bag, just the essentials. My movements were efficient, mechanical. I didn't pause to reminisce, didn't stop to run my hand over picture frames or the coffee table we once chose together. The house that once hummed with ambition and curated perfection now felt like a monument built for ghosts. The closets echoed with emptiness. Every corner whispered a line from a script I no longer believed in. I closed the trunk of my car and drove away from Charleston before dawn, headlights catching the early Oregon fog. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pine and distance. With every mile, I felt something unravel behind me, like a thread I'd been tugging on for years had finally snapped. Portland welcomed me with gray skies and soft drizzle. My new apartment was modest, nothing like the marble and glass mansion I'd left. But it had large windows, warm hardwood floors, and a quiet view of a courtyard garden where someone, perhaps an elderly neighbor, tended to rows of potted ferns and trailing ivy. It smelled like wet stone and fresh starts. Inside, I set my mug of coffee beside a small pile of items I had brought, wedding photos, notarized documents, a sealed manila envelope, and a USB drive. They sat on the table like artifacts, stripped of power now. I didn't open them. Didn't need to. Their grip on me was over. For the first time in years, I let the silence inside me become peace, not punishment. I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection met me without distortion. No mask. No pretense. Just a woman tired of being rewritten by others. I signed the final divorce papers with a pen that felt heavier than it looked. There was no courtroom showdown, no audience, no cross-examination. Just me, a signature, and the quiet click of the pen. The simplicity of the act stunned me. I sealed the papers in an envelope along with a short note. I release myself. I release you. This chapter is closed. I added the USB. No explanation, no theatrics, just my truth. At his law office, the receptionist didn't look twice at me. Just accepted the envelope, thanked me politely, and returned to her computer. To them, I was just a file number. To me, I had just dismantled a fortress. The USB held my voice, unfiltered, unashamed. In the video, I sat against a plain backdrop, the light gentle, the tone calm. I spoke slowly, carefully, but without apology. For years, I loved too quietly. I tried to belong to a story that had no space for me. I was loyal. I was erased. But now, this is my voice. And it is enough. That video wasn't meant to destroy anyone. But truth has its own weight. Whispers turned into discussions. Then meetings. Then consequences. Within days, murmurs began in Charleston. Ministers held hushed conversations in backrooms. Donors withdrew support. Journalists reopened closed tabs. People began to connect the dots. The veneer around Lucian and Vera cracked, slow but steady. Reputations don't explode, they corrode. But revenge? That wasn't my ending. That wasn't even the point. That afternoon, I walked into a local community center. No red carpets, no cameras. Just a familiar hum of hope. Nolan stood by the entrance, a bouquet of daisies in his hands. "Welcome home," he said. Simple. Sincere. I laughed, not bitterly, but softly. I'm not here to pick up where I left off. I'm not someone's second act. He nodded. Good. Then let's build your first. Inside, a group of young women sat in a semicircle, students, entrepreneurs, dreamers. They weren't waiting for a savior. They were waiting for permission to speak their own stories. I sat with them, not above, not in front. Just beside. I shared pieces of mine. Not with pain as a badge, but as proof. You don't need to be palatable to be powerful, I told them. Don't wait for someone else to give you space. You can set your own table. Their eyes lit up, not from what I said, but from the realization they'd been allowed to say it themselves all along. I didn't make grand speeches. I stayed to sweep floors, answer questions, listen more than I spoke. I helped organize a resource library, connect local shelters, and mentor quietly. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I walked through the halls lined with photos from years ago. Events I had once planned, now credited correctly under my name, restored with a quiet kind of justice. As evening settled, I stood at my apartment window. Oregon's sky melted into hues of amber and lavender. The kind of sky that doesn't shout but simply stays. I touched the scar just beneath my collarbone, not from violence, but from silence. It was no longer sore. Just there. I will carry this, I whispered, but it will no longer carry me. The world didn't give me closure. I made my own. And perhaps that's what a human ending really is, not a clean conclusion, not justice served on a silver platter, but the decision to walk forward even if the story stays messy. This wasn't a story of betrayal anymore. It was the beginning of freedom. Sometimes, the deepest wounds come not from strangers, but from those we once called family. Serena's story reminds us that silence in the face of injustice isn't strength, it's surrender. But reclaiming your voice, your truth, even when no one believes you, is the bravest act of all. What would you do if your own family tried to erase your existence? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful real-life family stories.